Number 1. Old House. This was a really weird story that happened quite a long time ago. When I was younger, me and my friends tried to start a heavy metal band. We lived in rural Kentucky, where most of the older folks around only liked country music. All of our parents were really anti anything that wasn't country and wouldn't let us practice when they were home. So we either had to do it when they weren't home or not do it at all. Hell, even if we didn't use an amp, they would seem to be able to hear it and they would get pissy about it. So you could see our problem. One night, our lead singer Jeff came to us with an idea. He lived in a rural area and told us he'd been out driving and had come across an old abandoned house out in the country. It had a big yard and a big porch and was far away from anyone, so it was a perfect place for us to go and practice in. I personally thought it was weird, but everyone else liked the idea. So we packed up everything in his pickup truck and went out driving the next day. I lived in town, so these country drives were not something that I went through a lot. I was sitting in the back seat with two of the other guys and some of our equipment. We drove out for over an hour down the roads through those hills until we were further out in the woods than I had ever been in my life. We finally came up upon the old house. It was a big 2-story house that you could tell was abandoned. It had a huge yard and porch. It was pretty cool, actually. So we started practicing, and it was probably the best practice that we ever had. We had so much fun, and we kept practicing late into the afternoon and into the evening. None of us really wanted to be hanging out there after dark, though. Well, that was any of us except for Jeff. He was drinking a lot more beer than the rest of us that night, and whenever he did that, he would get really adamant about practicing later into the night. It took a lot of convincing to finally get him to agree that it was time to go home. However, other than his insistence on staying out, it had been a pretty good day all around. It was not fully dark out yet when we were packing everything back into the truck. I was loading my drums on there when one of my bandmates grabbed me and tugged me on the arm. He pointed toward the house and told me that he caught somebody standing back there watching us. The person ducked back behind the house, though, before I had a chance to see anyone. I didn't know whether or not he really saw anyone, but either way, that was just another reason for me to decide to get out of there. We had no reason to believe that anyone actually lived in the house, as no one confronted us during the hours we had been out there. Jeff, being the drunk and abrasive person that he normally was, however, wanted to see if someone really was out there behind the house. Absolutely none of us were going to go back there with him. We tried to convince Jeff that we just needed to go, but being the drunken idiot that he was, he decided to walk back there, mocking whomever might have been back behind the house, calling for them like they were a chicken or something. It got really quiet for a moment when Jeff went behind the house. Carl, the driver, started the truck up. He just wanted to get out as soon as we could. We heard Jeff yell out in what seemed like pain and then quickly come running out from behind the house. He was yelling at us to get going as he ran up to the truck. He managed to climb in the back with me and the others as Carl gladly began driving out of the yard and back onto the country road. As we drove off, I was looking back at the house, trying to see if I could notice anyone there. I saw what looked like 3 really big figures standing beside the house, watching us as the truck drove out of there. Jeff had a huge gash on the side of his arm, and we had to rush him to a hospital. The only thing he claims to have remembered, as he really was drunk, was a large man with a hunting knife who cut his arm open. But he didn't seem to recall much else, other than running and jumping into the truck. Needless to say, we never went back to that house. Number 2. Late ride. When I was growing up, I would normally get to spend about a month to 6 weeks of the summer at my cousin's house. My mom and dad had a whole lot of problems, so this was always rather nice for me. My aunt and uncle weren't like them at all. They didn't drink a lot and always had plenty of things for us to do. It was always the high point of my year, getting to spend some time with some people who actually acted like a family. My family lived in the suburbs of a nearby city. It was a 4-hour drive out to the country where my cousin's family lived, but I can still see their house in my mind even decades later. They lived an hour out of town, and I even loved the ride to and from town because the countryside was so beautiful. My cousin Clay and I would always ride in the bed of the truck with our root beer and candy, looking out across the trees and fields as we drove along. When we were about 13 years old, Clay and I started watching scary movies, renting them from the video store, and in the 1980s there were tons of scary movies at the video stores. So we were really into being scared. But my uncle and a friend of his thought that horror movies weren't really scary. They would tell us that we didn't know the first thing about being scared. One night, we were watching a movie, and my uncle and his friend asked if we were brave enough to go for a ride in the back of the truck at night. We had done this before, and we actually both found it pretty frightening, but we also enjoyed that sort of thing. So we went for a ride with the two of them. Nothing scary really happened for the longest time, of course. I mean, in general, we were as scared as two 13-year-old kids would be in such a situation. But of course, we were also having a good time. That was until the strangest thing happened. Both my cousin and I were sitting against the left wall of the bed of the truck. We were looking at the inside part of the road, which led out to the deeper forest. As the truck drove on, we both saw this white, inhuman-looking being who was standing right by the side of the road. As the truck went past whatever it was, it tried to reach out and grab the truck, and we watched as its hand grazed the vehicle. Both Clay and I were terrified and began pounding on the front window. Clay's dad was about to pull the truck over to see what was wrong, but Clay told him to drive faster. I was looking behind us to see if I could see the thing behind us, but I couldn't see anything. After he stopped the truck and got out to see what was wrong, both Clay and I told his dad that we had seen some creature and begged him to get back into the truck and go on. However, the two men instead took a flashlight out of the cab and walked back to take a chance at finding what the two of us saw. For the short time that they were away, Clay and I were so scared. We were sitting with our backs to the cab of the truck. We barely moved as we kept expecting to see the creature again. It seemed like my uncle and his friend were gone a long time, but they eventually came back. They hadn't seen anything back there and told us we were imagining things. However, we didn't know how the two of us could have imagined the same thing. The rest of the ride was pretty terrifying until we got home. When we told my aunt about what we had seen, she accused her husband of setting it up, although he denied this. If he had set it up, he has not admitted it to me or Clay to this day. Whatever it was, it had scared the crap out of the both of us, but more so while we waited in the cab for my uncle to return. Number 3. Followed. I grew up in the country and remember it fondly. Although it is not all perfect, like a lot of people might want you to think that it is. My great-uncle, for interest, was this church-going World War I vet that everyone respected. A lot of people respected him even more for the big fields of pot he grew and then sold to just about everyone around. Plus, there was a lot of fighting and even gun violence that went on out there. Most of it was probably not reported or paid attention to, even when it was, so you didn't hear about it as much. I would drive up to my great-uncle's house normally every weekend. When he was getting older, he needed help taking care of his farm. I didn't get involved in the pot thing, though, just with other stuff. I didn't even know about the pot stuff until I was older. But when I was around 14, I was allowed to drive the old pickup truck out there to help out. I would normally then drive back home on Saturday night. I think when I was about 15, I got a late start home. I wanted to get home because there was something on late TV that I wanted to watch. I wouldn't have been able to do so at my uncle's place, because they didn't even have a television. I would get home in plenty of time. That wasn't something I was worried about. However, I didn't have a whole lot of practice driving after dark. We all lived out in the hills, but it took a while to get from one place to another. Plus, it was rare to run into other cars out there on those roads. Very rare during the day, much less at night. So, I wasn't really paying a lot of attention as I listened to some music on the radio. I nearly missed a car heading my way, and we would have been in a collision if I hadn't pulled swiftly to the right side of the road. As I kept driving, though, I noticed the car turn around, and then begin to follow me. I immediately was worried about the driver being pissed about the near collision, but for a while I wasn't sure. He wasn't doing anything aggressive, just following me. However, as the road turned up the side of the hill, and there was no barrier on the outside of the road, the car began getting aggressive. He kept driving up to the back of the truck, and even bumped me a few times. We weren't going extremely fast, but the road was narrow, and the slightest mistake could send me plummeting down the side of the hill. I tried speeding up every time that he tried to bump me, but I could only do it so much without really risking driving off the side of the hill. It occurred to me at one point that this was exactly what he was trying to make happen. That, of course, scared the hell out of me, and I tried to focus on my driving. I did a pretty decent job focusing and calming down. However, then I heard a gunshot coming from right behind me. It was an unmistakable sound, and I knew it had been fired from someone in the car behind me. I think whoever fired it thought it would cause me to speed up or lose control. The fear at hearing it, though, did the exact opposite and caused me to hit the brakes on the truck. The car then had to hit their brakes and turn the car to avoid hitting me. And this car that had been trying to drive me off the road ended up driving themselves off the side of the road. I didn't know what to do. I was just a terrified 15-year-old boy, so rather than do anything at all, I just drove home. I couldn't go back and check on someone who was trying to drive me off the road and who was shooting at me. The most I could do was make a call to the police when I got home about an accident. No one was seriously injured in the car accident. The car ended up hitting a tree, but it was in the papers and I found out who it was that was following me. They were some pretty dangerous guys, and I was terrified for a long time that they might have known who I was and try to retaliate. But I saw them several times in town and at school, and they never did anything. I guess I was lucky, and they had no idea who I was, but I made really sure to get home before dark every time after that. Number 4, the wrong way. I once was visiting my aunt out on the ridge. When I was a kid and a teenager, I used to always love going over to their house. As I got older and moved out on my own, I still liked to pay them visits. However, one visit, something went remarkably wrong. Nothing bad happened at their house, mind you. It was just a nice visit, and my uncle decided to have a few beers with me. And this happened a long time ago, mind you, and people would drink and drive a lot more back then than they do nowadays. I would never do something like this nowadays, but on this night I did. And I wasn't totally drunk by the time I was ready to drive home. but I was definitely worse off than I should have been. And when I drove out of my aunt's long driveway, I immediately made my first mistake. I turned the wrong direction on my very first turn, and instead of heading out for the town in which I lived in, I instead headed out deeper into the ridge. Once I got far enough to completely realize that I had gone the wrong way, I wasn't sure what to do. So I decided to keep driving until I could at least find a driveway so I could turn myself around. The rural road was way too narrow to do a turnaround just on the road itself, so I had to find a way to get back the way I had come. I had never driven out in that direction past my aunt's house before, so I had no idea how many other homes were out there, nor where the road eventually led to. After driving quite a while without coming across any driveways, I began to wonder what was the point of this road. I mean, there may have been a driveway or two before I realized I had driven the wrong way, but since then, there had been nothing, and I had been driving quite a while too. All I could guess is that it must have eventually spilled out onto a main road off of the ridge, but I hadn't come close to seeing anything like that yet. So I kept driving, and I cannot tell you how long that I was out there driving. I was quite tipsy in the beginning, but I seemed to sober up over a period of time. I couldn't tell if that was because of how long I'd been up there, or if it was the fear of the situation that got me to feel sobered up. But as the drunkenness wore down, the fear grew exponentially. It didn't seem like it made any sense. I kept driving and driving on this twisting and turning road, and I wasn't coming across anything at all. It didn't seem like it was possible for the road to keep going on forever, but that was exactly what seemed to be happening. My normally rational mind even began wondering what would happen if I was never able to find my way off of this never-ending road. It was during my panicking that something caught my eye further up the road. It looked like there was someone walking along the side of the road. It wasn't easy to make out at first because it was so dark outside, and the only light was the feeble amount of light that was coming from my headlights. But I could definitely see someone walking along the side of the road up ahead of me. At first I wondered if I should stop and ask for some help, but the situation had been scary enough up to that point that I really didn't want to. Who knew what a person walking around that late at night in the middle of nowhere would even be up to? Plus it looked like he was dragging something behind him. The whole thing just rubbed me the wrong way. As I got closer up and eventually past the guy, I got a lot closer look at what he was dragging, and it appeared to be another human being pulled by their legs, dragged along the side of the road. As I drove by, terrified, the man didn't even look over at me, seemingly oblivious as to me even being there. I drove a little further before I finally got to a driveway to turn around. However, I wasn't looking very forward to driving back in that direction. I had a tire iron in my car that I could use if I had a problem with the guy I saw earlier, who I just assumed at that point had murdered the person he was dragging along. I also didn't know how much longer I would be driving if I kept going in the direction that I was going, so I decided there was no way to go but back the way I came. Scared, I turned around and went back in that direction. Every moment I kept expecting to run into the man dragging the body. It should have happened pretty quickly, actually, as the driveway had appeared very shortly after I had seen him, but I didn't see him at all. He didn't really have much time to have gotten off the road and disappear either, so it seemed like he had just completely vanished. If that wasn't the strangest part, this next thing definitely was. In less than a half an hour of driving back that direction, I passed by my aunt and uncle's driveway. I knew for a fact that I had been driving a lot more than 30 minutes, yet I had made it back in less than that time. I had no explanation for it. It didn't make the rest of the ride back into town any easier on me either. However, by the time I got home, I was able to fall asleep pretty easily, exhausted from the strange events of the night. I've told a few people this story over the years. Some people believe me and some haven't, but those who didn't have never offered an explanation for what had happened that night, and neither can I. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. First, I want to thank all my paid Patreon subscribers, starting with my 2 VIPs, Chiamerah Cat and Pixie Hopper 8. I also want to thank Stinky News, EricaOdd, Tracy Sellars, Chronic J, and Heidi H. To anybody who contributed to the GoFundMe cat, I want to thank you very much. The cat has got his surgery and is on medication and is doing much better. I'm sharing some pictures in the community posts on my page, so check out there if you want to see how the cat's doing. If you like the story, let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button and the bell if you want to be notified of future videos. Leave me a comment that I will try my best to get back to, and share the story with someone you think might enjoy it. And if you have an original story you want shared on Killer Orange Cat, please send it to the address in the description. Now, I also want to mention my free Patreon members: Anthony Bowers, Remi, Venikins, Rose Metro, Woofer McWooferson, Cindy Cleveland, Vanapira Rayne, William H., Alien Unicorn 13, Kathryn Lynch, The Bama Guy 334, Michael Vasquez, Bonnie Lynn, Collet Bond, Krista Pike, Prince UVA, HF Creations, Bonnie Gibbs, Linda Moore, DJ Lira, and Evil Black Cat. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.